Welcome back. Let's continue again. We finished the last video on on us making the weapon and putting it on our back. In this one, we'll start doing the states and everything related to it, as well as the data assets. So it's gonna be a bit of an overview in a way. We're not gonna get stuck on details for the time being, as I'll be expanding more on this. Now, there's a console command that will be your best friend in TCF. If you open the Delta key and type show debug Tempest Combat, if you open this one, you'll see on the left side we have some colored names like current active ability, current active state, passive abilities and passive states, combat status, and ticking objects. Now you'll notice that current active state is set to idle, and if you start moving, it's walking, and if you hold shift, it's sprinting. Now, how do these things change, and what do the states really do, and how do they go from a state to another? We're gonna cover this in this video. Now, let's go back to the player character that we assigned a weapon to. In the weapon character, sorry, on the player character, the weapon inside it. If you guys remember, there was a data asset. Now, the data asset, this is where most of the magic happens. I explained a little bit about components being there as something to add to the player character. That means you can take off things that you don't need. Not all the AI, for example, have 12 components. Let's take a look at take a small look at the AIs. Now, if you open any AI, for example, let me take a live example rather than taking something that only dies. Let's take Sword and Shield enemy, for example. Just like the player character, it has a weapon class to spawn with. And the same as the player character, it has a data asset as well. Now, if you scroll down, it only has 9. For example, one of the differences between the player and the AI is it doesn't have, what do you call it, an input component. Since the AI does not have any inputs, it doesn't need an input component. Another small change is a camera mode or a targeting component. It doesn't have any of those. It doesn't have a camera to target with. It's not a player, so it doesn't matter. So this is some of the changes. Just know for now that the weapons between the AI and the player are identical. They all have data assets, and that's why you can see the AI weapons as well in this list. Anyways, back to the data asset. We have other things to worry about here. We mentioned something related to states. Now, states and abilities, they usually run together. So if I'm attacking somebody, I'm in attacking state. But the specifics of my attack, it can be a light attack, it can be a special attack, it can be a heavy attack. All this is different specifics, but the general term is attacking. Now, how do I assign which states to run and how do they run? Now, if you go to general properties, you'll see a bunch of indexes. I'm gonna explain the things that matter to us. For now, skip these two. We don't need them. I'm not gonna explain those right now. We don't care about this one. We care about this one. It's called states and abilities property. Now, for this one, if you go to abilities per state, you can assign a specific state and which abilities run with it. Now, we're not gonna assign the abilities that run with it right now. Let's talk specifics. Let's not talk specifics, I'm sorry. Let's talk about the general things. Being idle, walking, and sprinting. Now, character idle state, if you go to the plugin itself and you look for idle, you will notice it has a small portion of code and it has a can perform state. Now, since this is already set up, let's just assign it and use it. I'm just gonna explain in theory how it works, and I'm gonna create a new states after we're done with the idle and walking and sprinting. Now, any state will inherit from base character state, and the state gameplay tag assign it per state that you're creating. So this is idle, And we have walking as well as sprinting. Now you see a little difference in naming. Character idle is any character. However, player walking is only assigned to the player, because usually I don't just walk, they follow, they do something. Following or patrolling or something. That's a form of walking, but they're doing something a bit more general. So let's start with idle. We'll assign this one to it. And this one is a bit different. State.walk. This one is a bit different. You can notice some of them have different values. Now, let's stick with idle for now. The idle condition, the idle runs when you first equip a weapon. By default, it will be idle. So it's not going to check for the condition, it will automatically be in idle. States have conditions to run, and they usually try to perform the condition first. If the condition succeeds, they proceed. They start. If the condition fails, nothing happens. For example, if we go to if you go anywhere on the player character, and let's assign number 2 on the keyboard to run a specific state. Okay, how do I run a state? Get component by class, which is a component you will be assigned, like we discussed here, when you equip the sword that has that asset. So one of them is the state manager. So you can get component by class, and the state in here, you can take either of the two is okay. Take this one because this is more low level. And from here, try perform state of a class. It has two inputs, the state you wanna set it to, which is character idle state is one example, and a condition check. Let's take walking. Now if you take walking and it has a condition check, we can visualize the result of this call when you click number 2. If this returns true or false. True means it's running or it succeeded. False means it didn't. Now if you compile and try and click number 2, it's false. That means walking is failing. Now the reason walking is failing, if you go to walking state, can perform state, you will see two conditions here on can perform. One of them being the velocity bigger than 0. That means I'm actually moving. That's one thing. Two, I'm not falling. This condition was true. This one was not. How do I know or visualize? Not by me memorizing the system, but by you debugging it. For example, you try to run something, it fails. Okay, why is it failing? You need to find out. Sometimes you expect this to be true, but it's not. Or the opposite. How do I know? Right click on the return node, add breakpoint. Now, if I go play and click number 2, you see it's already running. Why is it still running? Every time you click a play, it's still running. That means something is trying to run it. Now we need to try and find out why. Now if you go to debug, blueprint debugger, and this is also very important. Let's go to the call stack and let's go play. You see it already stopped again. I'm playing, it stops in the same place. Let's check the call stack. Native code, we don't know. Even graph of idle state. Something here is running that leads to me stopping on this breakpoint. And this is more detailed. Event tick tempest object in the idle state. Interesting. Let's stop this and go find out what's going on in idle state. Now, by default, like we just discussed, idle state will run on the start. And it will perform start state, which will, this is something to note. I'm just checking if it's controlled by player, because it's the same state as used in the AI. If it is, add tickable object from the ticking component, which will, if you call this function and you implement the Tempest ticking interface on any blueprint and you call this if you call this event tick Tempest object, it will run this on every frame, just like a normal tick. If you want to take it off, you can remove tickable object, assign this to self, and you're good to go. Don't forget to have an owner assigned to the component by class. It can be a get player character a performing actor of a state, whichever you prefer. Now, we did this whole loop just to explain that I'm running on tick from the debugger we just checked. Now, debugger is trying to perform same thing we just discussed on the player character. Type perform state of a class. But it's taking. It's trying to perform falling. Well, that's not the one we're looking for, is it? Next is walking. It's trying to perform walk. And now we know why. That's why when you go and play, let me stop this for a bit. I showed you the debugger a while ago. Show debug, idle. Now if I walk, it's in walking. If I stop, it's back to idle. That means my state is changing based on the actions I'm doing. Some things can be done this way. Some other things cannot be done this way. So in the case of idle, walk, and sprinting, these three are more, it's not controlled by animation, but rather controlled by action. So in this case, don't be very intimidated by this. That's why I didn't want to create idle and walk and sprint from scratch, because I want to show you something simpler to create before we do this. So if we disable walk and we try to play, now Tempest Combat, and you see I'm actually walking, but I'm still in idle state. That's not practical in some cases. For example, one of you might decide that I want to only attack if I'm in idle state, not in walking. Some of you will be like, nah, I don't care. You can be walking and you can be idle, up to you. But notice here I'm not running it. So I'm never gonna be on walking state unless I specifically start it by clicking number 2, for example. You see it's still false. Why? If we eject for a second, I'm still playing, and go to walking, add a breakpoint, back here, and click number 2. It will stop you here. Now, if you hover the mouse, tells you return value. If you look at the very right, it's false. Still false. You look down, this is true. I'm not falling. This is false because my velocity is 0. This has to be bigger than 0 for it to be active. Otherwise, I'm not really walking, I'm more like standing still. So in this case, you can debug what happens when it happens. So let me stop playing and let's go back to idle and let me hook this thing up back again. This explains idle and explains walking. Okay, what about sprinting? Sprinting in TCF, as an example, relies on the holding of a spacebar. Now, how do I change these things? Now, back to the data, as you notice, this is sprinting. And just like walking and idle, this is sprinting state. If you go to can perform the state, it will check if I have a cost of a sprint. Now, the cost, we'll cover this in the special properties in a bit, but not right now. The second condition is me being in walking. And the third condition is me being in falling. I'm sorry, not being falling, so I'm not falling. Okay, but when does this really run? If you play, let's open the debugger. I'm walking. If I hold sprint, sorry, if I hold space, now it's running. Okay, how does space run this? Now, if we go back to the player character, because this is a good place to check where things are. Sprint, it's an input. Just like we discussed on the spacebar, it's an input. Okay, now the input is running a bunch of things, and then it's telling me, oh, can I stage sprint, which is this one. Always make sure the state gameplay tag is unique per state you're using, as well as it's assigned in the data asset. If it's not assigned, it will not find it. Okay, now we know how sprinting is. Okay, I want to change the spacebar. How do I do that? Okay, the inputs themselves, sprint underscore input. Where is this at? Go to the plugins and already sprint. We already have this input. Try deleting it. Don't delete it, of course. Just try deleting it. And you'll find it's referenced in here. Okay, sprint, right? But is it really assigned somewhere else or not really? In the case of TCF, go to player controller. And in the player controller, you will notice, just like any enhanced input system, it's using the mapping context. The mapping context is assigned wherever you want to assign it. It has the inputs that you want. And where is our sprint we're looking for? There it is. And it's on spacebar. You can change it here if you like. You can do whatever you want whenever you want. No problem. That's how you can change the input. And now you know how to call a state. When does it get called? If there's a specific class that calls it, as well as how to check or debug the conditions that go with it. I know this was a bit of a long video. It's a very important introduction, but you must know these three debugging techniques, and because from this point onward, it will make your life easier on how to see what is going on wrong and what leads to what and how. See you guys in the next video.